6 times. That's how much more critical mineral production the world needs by 2050. Not double, not triple. 6 times current output across copper, lithium, cobalt, and rare earths, according to the International Energy Agency's own projections. The last time demand surged at anything close to this scale, China was industrializing, and that cycle lasted over a decade. This time, the mining system is thinner. New projects take 16 years from discovery to first production, and most investor portfolios carry almost no exposure. A commodity supercycle may already be underway, and the majority of the market hasn't noticed. The International Energy Agency's 2025 outlook sets the baseline. By 2050, the world will need 6 times more lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper, graphite, and rare earth elements than it produces today. This is not a speculative headline. It is a measured projection tied to the announced climate and electrification pledges already on the books. For investors, that means the core thesis is not about short-term price swings or market sentiment, but about a structural, physical mismatch between what the world will require and what the supply base can actually deliver. This is the strict definition of a commodity supercycle: multi-decade demand growth, driven by real-world transitions, outpacing the industry's ability to respond. The next 2 decades will be defined mineral by mineral, not by abstract macro narratives. The numbers are the story, and the imbalance is measurable. Supercycles in commodities are rare, but history leaves a clear pattern. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, industrialization pushed global copper output from under 300,000 tons in 1880 to over 1 million by 1914, with prices rising 3 to 4 times. After World War II, Reconstruction and the rise of the automobile drove oil consumption from 12 million barrels per day in 1945 to over 55 million by 1973, while steel output tripled. The 1970s and early 1980s brought another surge. Copper production jumped from 10 to 17 million tons, and oil prices spiked on the back of 2 supply shocks before efficiency and substitution cooled the rally. Most recently, from 2000 to 2014, the China-led boom saw iron ore imports to China rise tenfold, and copper prices climb from $2,400 to $10,000 per ton. Each cycle ran for at least a decade, driven by structural demand that outpaced supply. The question now is whether today's energy transition and electrification are setting up a regime that meets the same test. Subscribe for more data-driven analysis. Mines do not scale like software or even factories. From the moment a promising ore body is discovered, the clock starts ticking. A clock that, on average, runs for 16 years before first production. S&P Global's latest review found that mines coming online between 2020 and 2024 required nearly 18 years, up from just under 13 years in the early 2000s. The United States now averages 29 years per project, second only to Zambia, while Chile and Australia manage shorter cycles, especially for expansions. But globally, the median is closing in on 2 decades. This is not a quirk of geology, it is the reality of permitting, engineering, environmental, social, and governance reviews, and capital discipline. The lag is not just academic. After the capital expenditure peak in 2012, global mining investment collapsed by 2016. The world's top 40 miners spent about $85 billion in 2022, finally reaching levels last seen a decade earlier. But the composition of that spend has changed. Nearly half now goes to brownfield expansions, not new discoveries. Exploration budgets, which dried up after 2016, only started to recover in the last 2 years. Most of the money flowing into projects today is tied up in assets that were initiated 10 or even 15 years ago. This is why a commodity rally does not automatically translate into new supply. Mines approved in response to today's headlines will not deliver metal until the 2030s. The result is a persistent supply deficit that can outlast the news cycle and even outlive the initial demand shock that triggered it. Investors expecting a rapid supply response to price signals are betting against the clock, and the clock is slow. Higher prices alone do not unlock the supply bottleneck in critical minerals. The first wall is permitting. In mining, approvals are not just paperwork, they are a timeline risk. S&P Global found that new mines coming online in the past 5 years average nearly 18 years from discovery to first metal, up from 13 years in the early 2000s. In the United States, the timeline stretches to 29 years per project, with regulatory reviews, environmental studies, and community negotiations piling on years before a shovel hits the ground. Even countries like Chile and Australia, which are considered efficient, now require a decade or more for greenfield projects. Resource nationalism is the second headwind. Governments are demanding a larger share of the pie. Chile's 2024 royalty reform raised the effective tax rate for major copper producers to nearly 45%. Peru and Indonesia have moved in a similar direction. These changes do not just skim profits. They alter project economics, raising the hurdle rate for new investment and reducing the pool of viable projects. What looks profitable at the headline price can quickly turn uneconomic after taxes and royalties are accounted for. Cost inflation is the third constraint. From 2022 to 2024, average mining input costs rose by 5% to 13% per year. Energy, labor, explosives, and equipment have all become more expensive, even as commodity prices rallied. In South Africa, electricity and water costs have outpaced general inflation, and wage growth continues to pressure margins globally. For any new project, these costs can erode returns before the first ton is shipped. When permitting delays, fiscal take, and rising costs stack up, the supply response to higher prices is not just slow, it is structurally constrained. The real question is which minerals are already showing the first signs of strain. Copper stands as the first real stress test for the Supercycle thesis. In commodity circles, copper has earned its nickname Dr. Copper because its price action often mirrors the health of the global economy. But this time, copper's role is deeper. Electrification, digital infrastructure, and industrial expansion are converging on the same metal, creating a demand stack that is both visible and measurable. Electric vehicles alone require an average of 83 kilograms of copper per car. That's not a marketing statistic, it's a physical input, confirmed by the International Copper Association. Multiply that figure by the projected ramp in electric vehicle production through 2035, and copper's demand curve starts to look exponential. But it does not stop with vehicles. Wind turbines, grid-scale batteries, and especially data centers driven by AI and cloud computing are all copper-intensive. S&P Global's latest breakdown shows copper demand rising from 28 million tons in 2025 to 42 million tons by 2040, with the biggest changes coming from renewables and data infrastructure. Electric vehicles remain the single largest end use, but the simultaneous build-out across sectors is what sets this cycle apart. On the supply side, the story is less flexible. The Andes to Central Africa copper belt contains the world's richest deposits, but geography is only part of the equation. Basin quality, reliable power, and access to ports determine which projects can deliver. In Chile and Peru, permitting and tax changes have raised the cost of new supply. In the DRC and Zambia, logistics and power reliability shape the export profile. The net result is a supply base that cannot ramp quickly, even if prices scream higher. Goldman Sachs has modeled a $15,000 per ton copper scenario, not as a fantasy, but as a plausible outcome if supply fails to keep pace with demand through the next decade. For investors, this is not a theoretical debate. Copper is the first metal where the numbers, physical, financial, and logistical, are all pointing in the same direction. Uranium spent nearly a decade in the penalty box after Fukushima. Spot prices collapsed from $70 per pound in 2011 to under $30 per pound by 2013, and the market languished through years of oversupply and utility destocking. By 2020, uranium was widely dismissed as a legacy trade, until the numbers started to move. Policy reversals in the United States, Canada, and the EU put nuclear back on the map as a zero-carbon baseload source, and the demand narrative shifted from theory to procurement. Between 2020 and early 2024, uranium's spot price rebounded from the low $30 per pound to over $100 per pound, a 200% move that outpaced most metals. Contracting volumes tell the real story. 2023 saw more than 160 million pounds of uranium signed under new long-term agreements, the highest since 2012. The era of wait and see is over. Utilities and corporates are locking in supply for 2 decades at a time. The driver is not nostalgia for old nuclear plants, but the physical needs of the AI era. Data center power demand in the US is projected to double by 2030. Unlike wind or solar, nuclear delivers uninterrupted, carbon-free electricity at scale. That logic just became investable. In September 2024, Microsoft signed a 20-year power purchase agreement with Constellation Energy to restart the undamaged 3 Mile Island reactor. Microsoft will buy the plant's entire output to guarantee clean energy for its data centers. The deal is underpinned by a $1.6 billion capital injection and a premium price structure, proof that corporate buyers are willing to pay for certainty. Cameco, the world's most recognizable uranium producer, is central to this new contracting cycle, supplying both utilities and direct buyers under disciplined production plans. The collision of signed demand and a tightly managed supply base is what investors care about. This is not a speculative squeeze, it is a structural reset. Uranium's price recovery is real, the contracts are public, and the buyers are some of the most sophisticated actors in the market. For the first time since Fukushima, uranium sits at the heart of the power system, not as a relic, but as a core input for the next wave of digital and industrial growth. Lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements form the core of the battery and magnet supply chain, three minerals with outsized leverage over the future of electrification and defense. The International Energy Agency projects lithium demand to rise by 146% between 2024 and 2030, driven almost entirely by battery electric vehicles and grid storage. Cobalt demand is set to more than double in the same window, with the vast majority of supply coming from a single country. Over 70% of the world's mined cobalt is extracted in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and most of it travels through a handful of industrial corridors before reaching refineries. That kind of concentration is not just a statistic, it is a strategic risk. Disruption at one rail line or port can ripple through the entire battery supply chain. Rare earth elements, meanwhile, are the linchpin for permanent magnets used in electric vehicle motors, wind turbines, and advanced defense systems. Here, the choke point is not in the ground, but at the refinery. China processes about 90% of global rare earths, and for many heavy rare earths, there are no alternative commercial-scale facilities outside Chinese borders. The result is a market where processing power can matter more than ore reserves. Western governments have announced funding for non-Chinese rare earth projects, but progress remains slow, and cost curves are unproven. Battery metals and rare earths are not interchangeable. Each is a different answer to the same industrial problem: how to store and move energy at scale, reliably, and with materials that are not easily substituted. The risk is clear. Physical supply is highly concentrated, and the ability to process and refine is even more so. The next question is where these resources actually sit, and who controls the routes around the bottlenecks. Subscribe for more on the new mineral map and the power plays shaping the supercycle. I worked in the gold and commodity supply chain in sub-Saharan Africa, managing logistics and mine-to-smelter operations, which is why I read Africa's infrastructure gaps differently than most market headlines. On a world mineral map, Chile and Peru light up for copper, Kazakhstan and Namibia for uranium, and the DRC and Zambia for copper and cobalt. But Africa's opportunity is consistently mispriced by global markets. The geology is world-class, yet the real constraint is the distance from pit to port, the reliability of the rail corridor, and the throughput at the export terminal. In the DRC and Zambia, for example, a copper project's economics can swing by 5 to 7% on net present value just from a 2-day port delay or a 15% rail cost increase. Less than 35% of African smelters are within 150 kilometers of a rail line. That is why I judge projects by logistics, not just by resource size or government rhetoric. Investors who price Africa only on headlines miss how infrastructure bottlenecks, not geology, set the true hurdle rate. Subscribe for more data-driven analysis. Control over minerals isn't just about who owns the ore, it is about who controls the routes, the processing, and the final trade. The contest between the United States and China is a real-world fight for access, logistics, and industrial leverage, not just market share. China processes nearly 90% of the world's rare earths and refines over 60% of global cobalt, while the United States has turned to legislative tools like the Defense Production Act and the Inflation Reduction Act to secure domestic supply chains. This rivalry extends far beyond headline tariffs or export bans. It is visible at the port gates, in refinery investments, and in the scramble for long-term offtake agreements from African, Latin American, and Central Asian producers. Trade integration is now a swing factor that can reshape project economics overnight. The African Continental Free Trade Area is a case in point. If fully implemented, it could cut cross-border tariffs and streamline customs, lowering the delivered cost of minerals and making some projects bankable that would otherwise fail on logistics alone. For a copper mine in Zambia or a lithium project in Mali, a 10% reduction in rail or port friction can mean the difference between a positive and negative net present value. Investors who treat logistics and trade policy as afterthoughts risk missing where the real value is created or destroyed. In a supercycle, it is not just the supply in the ground, but the routes and rules above it that decide who wins. Commodity investment takes shape through 5 distinct categories, each offering a different balance of risk and reward. Diversified majors, such as BHP, Rio Tinto, Glencore, and Freeport, anchor the field. These companies operate across copper, iron ore, nickel, coal, and often potash or aluminum. Their scale lets them weather volatility and shift capital as cycles turn. For those seeking stability and liquidity, diversified majors are the foundation. Pure play miners distill the thesis further. Focused on a single mineral or a closely related set, these firms ride the full force of price swings. Their fortunes rise and fall with the cycle, amplifying both gains and setbacks. Pure plays are the high beta choice, offering direct exposure but demanding a stronger stomach for risk. Royalty and streaming companies stand apart. Rather than run mines, they finance projects in return for a slice of future revenue or metal output. This model captures price upside and production growth, yet sidesteps much of the operational hazard. Franco-Nevada, Wheaton Precious Metals, and Royal Gold exemplify this approach, often thriving when mining costs climb. Mining infrastructure, like ports, railways, power, and water, remains overlooked. These assets control the bottleneck, collecting steady, inflation-linked cash flows regardless of commodity prices. ETFs round out the map, offering instant diversification and liquidity. They track baskets of miners or specific metals, making broad exposure accessible, though rarely matching the upside of a single standout stock. Every cycle comes with honest risk. The first is recession, a broad economic slowdown that can pause demand for years, even when the long-term supply gap remains. The second is technology substitution. New battery chemistries, lower copper wiring, or sodium-ion breakthroughs can undercut material intensity, especially if governments or manufacturers pivot faster than expected. The third is recycling at scale. If secondary supply from spent batteries and electronics ramps up, it will pressure primary demand and flatten price spikes that pure supply-demand models might predict. Portfolio discipline starts with sizing. For most investors, broad commodity or mining exposure belongs in the 5 to 10% range of liquid assets, enough to move the needle, but not so much that a cycle pause or sharp correction inflicts portfolio damage. The next layer is a single pure play, one focused miner, sized at 2 to 5%, chosen for its direct leverage to a core thesis, whether that is copper, uranium, or battery metals. This is the high beta portion, where conviction meets volatility. The final piece is a royalty or streaming company watch list. These businesses offer asymmetric upside to price and volume, but with less operational risk. They rarely demand immediate action, but tracking their contracts and deployment pace is essential for timing entry. The logic is simple: size for volatility, diversify for regime risk, and keep a watch list for tactical moves. Subscribe for more data-driven commodity analysis. Supply chains don't care about investor sentiment, only about ORE in the ground and projects that actually reach production. Today, critical minerals remain bottlenecked by years-long permitting, underbuilt infrastructure, and concentrated geopolitical leverage. For those of us operating in Africa's gold and mineral corridors, the reality is clear: scarcity is policy. In cycles like this, missing the setup matters more than missing the narrative. Subscribe for more grounded commodity analysis.